Welcome to the April 4th edition of the Kubernetes SIG CLI bi-weekly meeting. I'm Sean Sullivan, I'm your host. We will jump right into the announcements. There's not too many of them. So the release is scheduled for next week, April 11th on Tuesday. That's version 127. And another important announcement is that the KubeCon EU in Amsterdam is coming up. There's a link there to register for the Contributor Summit. And additionally, I think a lot of work has already been done, but the SIG CLI annual report will be merged by the end of the week. And I think we've got quite a bit in there, but please have a look at the link and see if there's anything else that you think should be shared with the rest of the Kubernetes community. So with that, does anyone else have any other announcements that they would like to share with SIG CLIers? If not, we can move on to the next section, which is where we get to meet the new members of the SIG CLI or people who haven't been here for a while. So if you would like to introduce yourselves to the SIG CLI, this is an opportunity to do that. It's completely voluntary. And if you don't want to, that's fine as well. So is there anyone who would like to introduce themselves?
Yeah, I can go. My name is Adil. I work with Ericsson, so I have one issue in the Kubernetes that I want to discuss today. I mostly work with the Metal Cube community. Is a cluster is related to the cluster API. Yep, that's mostly it from my side. I just wanted to discuss my issue that I have in the Kubernetes here. Yep, thanks.
Welcome. Yes, I noticed that you had an item on the agenda at the very beginning. Is there anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? If not, we could move on to the next section of the meeting, which is updates in the for the sub-projects and KEPs. Are there any sub-projects? I know we probably don't have much for KEPs, but is there anything on sub-projects that we'd like to give updates on? If not, we could move on to the open discussion. And we'll start with Adil, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who has an issue with drain, kubectl drain. Adil, would you like to take over?
Yes. It's not an issue. It's a small improvement that I want to do. Basically, in Kubernetes, we have this one callback, which is on port deleted or evicted. I would like to have a few more callbacks. When we start the eviction process, we can add another callback, and also if the eviction or the deletion is failed, we can send another callback. But why we are doing is why I want to do this is because we are using this Kubernetes in cluster API controller, and there sometimes some ports get stuck in the eviction process, and it's really difficult to find which port is stuck. And so with these callbacks, we can have like more granularity on the this eviction process, and we can report them easily where we want. I would like to know if it's okay, if this thing makes sense, or is there what are the comments of the SIG CLI community like? First, I posted in SIG Node, but Sergey mentioned it. It's more related to SIG CLI. So,
So this is not something that would affect kubectl drain itself. It's just some of the code that kubectl drain is implemented with that you're reusing.
Yes, yes. I can share this also where we use kubectl in our controller. I think it's in the issue also, but I can share the chat also.
I think it's awesome that y'all are using some of our stuff there, and we find this a lot. One of the things we run into though is we don't version the surface area of a lot of the commands as an API, so we don't really have like a compatibility guarantee between different versions. It's more so like we expose things that we need for other commands in other places. I know in the past we have decided to expose things that people needed or made a couple changes to what we exposed. And I think I'm okay doing that in general with the understanding that it's not a version guarantee API. And if we need to change something, we might change it and not know who's using it. You know, what do the rest of y'all think?
Yeah, I was
I
just
realized
looking
here the
around the
ask
code.
had a fallback. Sorry.
No, I was just poking around the drain helper to see what code we're talking about modifying here. Because I have that same sentiment. Like I don't have any objection to having that functionality, but given that this is mostly built for kubectl's needs and maintained for that, and it's the helper, it's not part of the like main surface. That's really my only hesitation, that we don't provide those guarantees to be like really excellent as a library. But if the callbacks are really well tested, then that can provide like and like link to the issue and everything, then that's probably sufficient.
Yeah, I
Did you have
can.
thoughts? What were you gonna say, Adil?
Yeah, I was gonna say like I can create a PR and you guys can check how it's doing or whatever you guys suggest. If it's okay, then I can go forward and create a PR.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that. It sounds like Katrina would be too, with the caveat that we don't like version or guarantee compat for especially helper commands like that. Probably would be not a reason to break it in the future. It's probably been pretty stable, that helper, for a while. But that's just kind of like the general caveat we have there.
Okay. Yeah, it's fine.
Thank you for that, Justin.
Yeah, I can go ahead and then it's fine, right? I can go ahead and create a PR. It's fine with
Thank you.
caveat that you mentioned. Yeah, okay. Thanks. Thank you.
Appreciate you coming by. We're always happy to help out other projects for sure.
Yep, thank you so much.
Okay, so I guess we can, are we able to go to the next issue? Thanks, Adil, for that. So let's move on to Brian's issue. Brian, would you like to take over?
Sure. Yeah. So probably best to look at the overview that I put on there, and that kind of explains what the problem is. So, excuse me. So we've had a couple issues that have come up, and this is related to, it's sort of a very special case, but if you have a pod that has multiple containers, and I put the three things that have to happen there. Oh wait, sorry. If you can look at the overview that I linked on the third link there.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, let me get that. How's that?
Yep. Yeah, so I tried to kind of capture the condition where this happens in the summary, but there's basically like three things that have to be true for this problem to happen. So if you have a pod that has multiple containers, if one of the containers or more of the containers specifies the resource limit, and one or more of the containers do not specify a resource limit, then it's a little bit confusing. And there's been a couple issues that have come up over, well, two that I know of, one recently and then one a couple of years ago that have come up. And where it's confusing is, well, let's scroll down to the example to illustrate the problem. So here's an example of a pod. The pod's called unlimited container, and it has two containers. One of them has a CPU limit of 50 and a memory limit of 200. And then the second container, bar, has no limit. It has some requests, but it doesn't have a limit. So in this case, yeah, so I just summarized what I said there in the table. And if you scroll down a little bit farther, I asked the question, like, well, based on that configuration, what would you expect that the CPU limit be for the overall pod? Should it be 50 or unlimited? Given that I think it's intuitive that it would be unlimited because there's two containers, one has a limit and the other does not. Therefore, the overall pod is unlimited. But if you do a kubectl describe node, you see something that's kind of confusing. So down there, the fifth pod there, my pod, the unlimited container, it says the CPU limit is 50 for the pod. So that seems confusing to people, and I think rightfully so. And then also confusing is in kubectl describe node, we also attempt to summarize the aggregate node limits, and it also sums it up and includes it. So as soon as you have one container that's unlimited, effectively there's no limit on the overall resources on that node, I guess. I'm not sure. So I put all these, I tried to kind of summarize what the questions are in the open questions section down below. And I guess this came up in the bug scrub, and a couple of years ago, so I remembered this problem because a couple of years ago this came up, and I attempted to fix it. And what I found was that kubectl does its thing to try to figure out what to show, but then in the API, there was actually several, at the time I did my PR, there was actually several places where a similar calculation was performed, but not in exactly the same calculation. And it's a little confusing to figure out exactly what it's, how it interprets that. Since then, it looks like some work has been done in the API to unify all those different places that it previously was calculating, but we still have our way of showing what we think the limits are and the real way. And far as I can tell, they are pretty similar. So I don't necessarily think that we are different than the way it's really happening. But I guess there's a couple of main questions. First of all, is 50 the right number to show there? And second of all, if it is correct, maybe we should be showing a warning or a notification that says, hey, one or more containers is unlimited, therefore this number is not accurate or may not be accurate, and so on and so forth. So I guess I said a lot there. Does that Does that make sense? Do you have any questions? Are there any thoughts on this problem?
The question seems clear and well explained. Thanks, Brian. And it does, you're right, it does seem quite confusing that there would be a limit displayed when there, in fact, one of the containers within the pod is unlimited.
Yeah, I know that this is a general community issue. Like, I'm pretty sure there's tons of blog posts written about explaining not to use a request without a limit. And I know I'm pretty sure this is part of the CKAD or one of the Kubernetes certifications. They ask and test you on this scenario. But I agree, it's very confusing, and I've had people bring it to me a few times.
I'm not so sure on the API side if it really is unlimited. It might actually be 50 in this case. I'm not even sure that what we're showing is wrong. And I looked at it a little bit and haven't had as much time as I'd like to kind of dig in and really find out if it's really 50 or unlimited. I mean, maybe what we're showing is exactly right, and we just need to explain it better. Does anybody know offhand? I also linked to the further down in that document. I think I also linked to the two places, one where we calculate it and one where the API code calculates it, if anybody's interested in looking further.
Yeah, and it sounded like Clayton had thoughts from your PR, right? Oh, let me link the
Yes.
comment stamp.
That's a good point. There was a lot of discussion or a fair amount of discussion on that. And in fact, the code that my PR was changing has actually changed since then. So it's possible that there have been changes made since my PR was kind of old, like a year and a half old. So so it's possible that something was changed. Looks like they cleaned it up and unified all the different places where it was previously calculated.
Yeah, I agree that the important thing is that we're accurately reflecting what happens, that we're giving correct information. And I don't think our SIG is the one that has the answer on what that behavior is. I think that would be SIG node or SIG scheduling, probably SIG node based on the discussion, if I'm skimming it correctly.
Yeah, it seems to
I'm
be
just looking
quite
through
involved.
Yeah, I'm just looking through our docs to see if we call out this behavior, what happens when you set one and not the other.
Looking at the PR that's I think on screen right now, it seemed like it reached, like we got the right people looped in, everything was going well. Like it seems like we probably shouldn't have closed it, right? Like we shouldn't start a new PR and like make everyone repeat the same process, right?
Yeah, I mean, the PR did close because it got rotten. So it wasn't intentionally closed, but you're right. We shouldn't so this PR was maybe too ambitious. It was attempting to fix what I thought might be a problem in the way that the API handles this, but I'm not so sure it was a problem. So, but if it is, maybe we should reopen as opposed to opening a new one, or definitely you're right. We had the right people involved here.
How bad does the rebase look for this one, Brian? You said some of this changed.
I'm not sure.
Like Clayton's first open question there is, let's make sure this is truly the intentional behavior, right? So someone needs to know what the intentional behavior is here.
Yeah, I think that's the crux of the problem is that nobody in this PR and nobody on the call today seems to really know what the intended behavior is for this.
Well, I mean, Clayton described links to the code as it exists today. There is a question, and he basically said, maybe that wasn't our original intent, but unless someone can prove a security vulnerability, we're not changing it. So it doesn't really matter what the original intent was. The code is the code, and we should probably reflect reality, right? Like, unless we actually want to go down the route of like, this is fundamentally broken and we need a massive cap and redesign it all. But we see that how the code behaves, or we can look up how the code behaves, which is not what I expected, by the way.
That's an excellent point. And somewhere in the code, I saw there was a comment that said the way that this behaves is actually part of the API. So if you change how this behaves, you're breaking the API. So you're right.
Well, to Arta's point in the chat, a warning might be at least step one, or make it a little more obvious for the user what's going on.
What would that warning be, though?
I would think it would just be like, these are the limits, in the describe. Warning, there are containers that have no limits placed on them, so these are not functionally correct necessarily. I mean, probably better words than that. It's early. I don't know what to say, but yeah.
Can we output into the table view where we represent it now and just put no limit or something?
I'm not sure it's
Brian.
I don't know if it's clear that that's actually true. I think there may be a limit when you have two containers and one does not set a limit. I think the C group may actually have the limit. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
So Brian, would you be willing to reopen this, or at least dig slightly further in? And I don't think we're going to resolve that now. I think it sounds like it's going to require some more research and some more coordination elsewhere. Would you be willing to be involved in that, Brian?
Yeah, I can take that. I guess my thinking is probably there's two things here. One is from kubectls perspective, we want to show what is accurate, but from the API's perspective, there may or may not be a change needed there, but it's sort of like independent of what we do. So I guess from our SIG's perspective, if I can, or if I or somebody else can figure out what the actual behavior is, then we can make sure that we're reflecting the actual behavior first. So that sounds like actually maybe that's where it ends, since the behavior is the API. And the comment I saw that's basically saying, hey, if you change this function, that's an API change that needs to be API reviewed. Is that what everybody else is thinking here? Is that our primary goal just needs to be to reflect the way it works currently?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me.
Okay, so let me see if I can take this PR, figure out the way it's working currently, and kind of boil this PR down, maybe get rid of all the API changes, and then just, yeah, let me see if I can simplify and make this consistent with how it works today, and just focus on kubectl change.
On the kube control part of it, yeah.
Yep. All right.
The only thing I would add is that, like, if that turns out to be unintuitive, like the real behavior turns out to be what people are reporting to us as a bug, we might want to ensure that there's proper documentation of the way that it really is beyond, our display being correct, so that when we have those issues, we don't have to go through the whole digging up whether or not this is right again.
Yes, otherwise we'll be back here again. So yeah, agreed.
It looks like SIG Instrumentation has a triage meeting this week, and their regular meeting is next week. And I think it's at 12:30 your time, Brian. But we can always swing by there since it's their kept. They might have thoughts.
Yeah, that's a good call. Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
Thanks for bringing that one up, Brian. If everyone agrees, we could move on to the next issue. Okay, the next issue is with Alex, where we'll be discussing a proposal for a repository for a SIG CLI sanctioned client-side validation tool. Would you like to take over, Alex?
Yeah, could you show the doc?
Yep.
Hey, just scroll down a little bit to the table. I don't think we really need to dig into the weeds of this for this presentation. But yeah, basically shift left validation is a big topic that's been coming up. People have been syncing their Git repositories with their clusters more often. And also we have new features like cell validation rules that have been coming up, and people are making use of them to eliminate their webhooks. And there's no current client-side tools that allow people to validate their schemas. I've done a bit of a survey of the tools that exist today. There's the biggest one is pretty much kubeconform or kubeval. Kubeval is currently deprecated and points new users to kubeconform. They're based on popular JSON schema libraries. So first they convert the Kubernetes schema to JSON schema and then validate objects based on that. So right out of the box, they kind of just don't support the custom Kubernetes validations that we want to do. This chart kind of shows what's the like the support matrix for different types of tools in the community. We have kubeconform on the left, and you can see it does pretty well on things that are well supported by JSON schema. But once we get into Kubernetes specific things like having duplicate things in sets or validating metadata, name, and cell validations, it starts to fall flat. And it is kind of hard to patch this upstream to fix this because a lot of those features are pretty Kubernetes specific. And to keep it in parity with Kubernetes, we would probably want a first party upstream supported solution. The second column is a quick prototype tool I made that does have some problems, but it definitely improved the situation for all the Kubernetes specific validations in addition to catching everything that kubeconform can catch. There are some gaps with the Open API spec itself, but we also have on my team someone who's working on a proposal to change Kubernetes types to use Open API more in their validations rather than the hand-coded native type validation. So that should improve over time. Yeah, the third solution people have is driver and client, which is based on Open API v2 and a handwritten Open API validator that's in the Kube Open API repo. It's pretty feature incomplete. It doesn't catch most things. I think a good end state for this project is to not only have a standalone tool, but also to link it back into kubectl and use it for the client side validations when it's doing its create, edits, applies, etc. So yeah, the driver on server side, of course, is going to catch everything. So that's something that people do end up doing. They'll start up a kind cluster, apply all their objects to it, and just try directly against the cluster that way. The problem with that is that's really slow, to spin up a kind cluster and to test on. You can't really do it like interactively in an IDE. So a client-side offline tool is probably the best way to go about this. And what I'm looking for from this SIG, I guess, is like kind of a sanctioned approval that this is something we want to do. We do already have precedent with the driver and client. It's just not as good as it could be. How we want to do this, whether we want to open up a new repo in sigsks.io or continue. I think most of the code for the current implementation is in Kube Open API, so that's definitely an option to put things in that library there. Actually, sorry, that's probably incorrect due to like dependency cycles with Kube Open API, but we can figure that out. Yeah, just looking for what the SIG thinks of this idea, where we should take this in the community to push this forward.
So I would just add that I think that this idea of a client-side validation is becoming more and more important as we've moved a lot of the validation to the server side. There's kind of this gap where client-side validation is becoming more challenging, and so this actually something that is kind of sanctioned by the SIG CLI may be very helpful, since we don't really have a say in how kube conform works. Kubeval is deprecated, and if we sponsor a particular this particular tool, which appears to be a quantum leap better, then we're going to have a lot better say on how that works, and it kind of fits within our charter very well, I believe.
I agree that it's a really common problem for sure. One thing that comes to mind that's not in the table, if I'm reading correctly, is validating admission webhooks, which would require dry run equals server really to catch, similar to images, right? So I think that's something that usually comes up in these conversations, is that we can make a better and better client-side tool that catches everything schema-wise that's possible, but there's always going to be some cases that without hitting the real API server, specifically the one that you're targeting and that has all of the policies in place that you are actually going to deploy against, you can't be 100% sure. That doesn't mean that it isn't useful to have something that catches the vast majority of issues at CI time. I completely agree. But I just wanted to bring that up because I think that's something we usually talk about in these conversations. And the other big question that I have, I guess, is around like, if the SIG is going to sponsor a solution to this, I guess our current one, which you've pointed out rightly in the table, is the dry run equals client, that's baked into kube control, and people do use that for validation today. So is our ultimate goal just to provide a separate standalone tool that would maybe be exposed as a crew plugin, or are we experimenting and potentially going to bring something into kube control proper? Would it replace dry run equals client? So if with those kind of questions, it pushed me towards like, maybe we do need a quick cap. But I'm not saying for sure. It's just I know that, for example, the pruning effort that we did a number of years ago. I think it was chartered something like 2017, 2018 as a separate sub-project. And that ended up not really being brought back into kubectl as originally intended because there wasn't an explicit plan to do so. And we're now finally addressing that with the full cap that we are just implementing for 127. So just want to kind of tackle up front, like what do we see like the end user experience that we're going to recommend? Are we going to tell people, are we going to deprecate Giant Equals client? We're going to replace it, we're going to enhance it, we're going to have a separate built-in, or is it ultimately like a crew plugin that would live alongside what they do today? Sorry, that was very wordy.
Yeah, I'm not sure what other people think, but I think the best fit would be to publish this as like a kubectl plugin that people invoke standalone, and also, but it's also available as a library that kubectl might link in the future. But definitely integrating in kubectl wouldn't be my first priority. The first priority would be to get the standalone tool. So to integrate into kubectl, I see what you mean, that it would require kept. I think that would only be for like the actual phase where we're integrating it into kubectl, and we can do most of our development outside of that life cycle.
From a practical standpoint, are the libraries you intend to use able to be brought into kubectl if we wanted to do that eventually, or would we end up re-implementing?
Sorry, can you rephrase that?
So we do have a lot of restrictions on how we can implement things in kubectl, and what Kubernetes projects can depend on. I don't remember the specifics of it, but the subcommand for it, convert, there we go. Kubectl convert originally was a subcommand. We had to pull it out, and it's published as a crew library for dependency reasons, if I understand correctly. So I'm wondering if we'd have the same issue here, or if that's not a relevant concern.
I haven't looked deeply into that. My initial gut feeling is that there probably shouldn't be any dependency problems. I'm using pretty much only Kubernetes dependencies from KK, and it's in the Kubernetes dependencies and the whole transitive chain of those. So I haven't really pulled in anything extra outside of that, but I'll definitely look into that.
The kubectl convert issue was that in order to do the convert, you have to depend upon the internal version of objects, which is not supposed to be depended on. It's not supposed to get outside of the API. So there was that one particular subcommand that, because we wanted to keep it, had to be pulled out. You're right, for dependency reasons. It depends on something that shouldn't be depended on, but I'm not sure that would be the same issue here.
I think this sounds great. Thanks for putting it together and presenting it. I like the route of going a plugin, and plugins are pretty easy to talk about upstreaming later. And I would definitely love to see something like this baked into kubectl.
Yeah, and one more thing, like we do have a validate flag specifically. Maybe that's worth, like this validate is strict warn or ignore, and it uses server-side validation if possible. So I think if we're talking about like what validation strategies the SIG offers, and we'll recommend that's a good one to include.
All right, so it sounds like there's generally support. I'm wondering if anyone knows like the next steps for setting up a SIGs repo, or how we can get the ball rolling on that.
I think that, yeah, we're very receptive to the idea. Sponsoring and maintaining a sub project is essentially what you're asking for, if I understand correctly. So I would like to get Mache, like the other tech lead, in on that before agreeing to it. And it would be really helpful if you could put together a list of proposed maintainers so that we can make sure we actually meet the requirements in that regard as well.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. I'll contact you guys on Slack, follow up.
Thanks.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that, Alex. Is that the last item that that does look like the last item. So we can draw the meeting to a close if we agree. I was hoping to maybe spend just a couple minutes with Brian, Arda, and Marley, or anyone else who's interested in WebSockets, just to coordinate real quick. But anybody else who's not interested in that, you are more than welcome to drop off. And we appreciate you joining us. And we'll see you hopefully in the next 2 weeks. And for Brian and Arda, Marley, anyone else who's interested in WebSockets, as I mentioned before, I sent the document. Actually, I'll just put the document, the URL in the notes, about transitioning from Speedy to WebSockets, and so this particular item, this particular issue has been going on for 8 years, and so there's a significant amount of context, and so that's the URL for that particular document. So I wanted to centralize and organize the, did I just lose? Okay, there we are. I wanted to centralize and organize all of the context as much as possible, and I wanted to make it accessible as well for those who aren't as familiar with what's going on with WebSockets or Speedy or any of the bidirectional streaming. And so this document starts, hopefully, I'm attempting to make this an easy introduction at the beginning, and then it has all of the gritty details by the end. And so I've kind of discussed, like, there's an overview, and then discussed where we are currently, as well as kind of the basics of how HTTP works when you're upgrading to Speedy or WebSockets or some other protocol, doing a 101 switching protocol. And so there's this particular issue, it touches multiple parts of the system. It touches everything from kube control to the API server proxies to kubelet, and then kubelet actually even proxies to the container runtime. So in the code that I've been debugging, I've actually been, writing log statements and all of these elements, and I tried to actually include all of those nitty-gritty details on how, using kind, that was the development environment I was using, a kind cluster, how I would touch every single one of those elements, including rebuilding the container runtime, which is where the WebSockets and the Speedy bidirectional streaming gets terminated. And so what I wanted to just say to you guys, I'm going to add you guys as editors for this, is please let me know if any of this stuff makes sense, what you think needs to be added. I'm not sure I got all of the links and all of the context, but as I've said, it's been going on for 8 years, and I've tried to in one document kind of organize it all. So with that, I'm not gonna, it's gonna take a while to kind of, I would imagine, to dig into that document and see, have any feedback on it. But please, through the Slack channel that I've opened, let me know. And as I said, I'll make you guys editors, so you guys can just go ahead and change the document as it is. And please, if you get the chance, let me know whether or not you can build the container D, that container runtime that's vendoring in the API server WebSocket code. That whole debugging cycle is pretty involved. And if you get the chance, let me know what you think about that, and whether or not it's explained, or if you have some better ways of doing that. I've already gotten some feedback from Antonio Ojea, and love to hear your guys' feedback. I'll shut up now if anybody has anything to add to that. So you guys can all see the document, correct?
Yes.
Does anybody else want to be added to that Slack channel on the WebSockets development? Because so far, Brian, Marley, and Arda have said that they're interested, and I can add anyone else who's interested as editors of this document, so that we can make it, completely collaborative, or at least more collaborative. Okay, great. So I'll just leave that as at the end. And if you have anything else to add on the WebSockets, please let me know through the Slack channel. So with that, I will, unless there's anything else that needs to be added, I'm going to end the meeting. Anybody else? Okay, great. Appreciate all your help, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean.